Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun and today we are making pizza rolls. So today's recipe makes a great snack or appetizer, or you can even serve it with a nice big salad for dinner. These are fun, my kids love eating them, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Now for the base or the bread or the pizza dough part of the pizza rolls, we are going to be using the internet's #1 pizza dough recipe, which is mine, thank you very much. I'm serious, if you Google pizza dough, you're gonna find mine. Hopefully that's still true by the time this comes out. Anyway, this pizza dough comes together very quickly, not a lot of kneading necessary. So grab yourself a medium or large size mixing bowl, and we're going to add about a cup of flour into the bowl. And we're also going to add a packet of instant yeast. This is 1/4 ounce. Instant yeast makes everything come together super fast. We'll also be adding 1½ teaspoons of sugar, a little bit of sugar, it doesn't make the dough sweet. 3/4 teaspoon of salt, it's just a regular table salt, nothing fancy. And then my recipe also has the option to throw a little bit of extra flavor into the dough. We are going to be adding 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder and 1/4 teaspoon of dried basil to the recipe as well. Let's go ahead and just mix these dry ingredients together. Next, I need 3/4 cup of warm water, so I'm going to run over to my sink and grab that. The important thing about the water is it not be too cold, not be too warm. You want it to be around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to grab that. All right, 3/4 cup, we're going to add this right in. And I'm just going to use a wooden spoon to stir everything together. Oh, and before I stir these ingredients together, I'm going to add some oil. We need 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Almost forgot that. All right, now we can stir everything together. And the dough is going to be not very dough-like at this point. It'll be very wet, that's expected. All right, so in the beginning, I told you to put a cup of flour into your mixing bowl. You can use all-purpose flour or bread flour. Bread flour is going to give you a little bit more of a pizza dough-like feel. So that would be my recommendation, but all-purpose flour works just as well. So there's a cup in here already. I have another cup measured out. So in total, for this recipe, you are going to need 2 to 2 1/3 cups of flour. Pizza dough, or anytime we're making a yeast recipe, sometimes you will need a little bit less or a little bit more than the recipe calls for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gradually add this flour until I get a dough that's the texture and consistency I'm looking for. Of course, I'm going to show you what this looks like so you can do the same thing at home. So what I'm looking for here is a dough that is clinging to itself and pulling away from the sides of the bowl while I'm mixing. You don't want to add too much flour at one time or the dough is going to seem too dry, when in reality it's not as dry as it needs to be. The dough just hasn't been able to properly absorb the flour. All right, see, this is still too sticky. I'm going to add the rest of my flour, bringing us to 2 cups of flour in here. All right, so my dough is clinging to itself. It's looking a little bit dry, but I'm just going to mix it a little bit longer. And you can also use your hand if you want, it's not necessary. This recipe doesn't call for any significant kneading, but sometimes it's just easier to use your hand than to use the wooden spoon. So we have a dough, it's clinging to itself, it's not too sticky, and I'm just stirring to mix it. This isn't kneading. A little bit more flour. Okay, still slightly sticky, clinging to itself, no dry flour, other than that little bit I just knocked on there. We're good to let this dough rise. So I like to do this in a separate bowl. I'm going to grab a mixing bowl. It should still be medium to large size because the dough is going to rise a little bit. Drizzle with just a little bit of olive oil, or in my case, this is just a blend of olive and avocado oil. Any cooking oil will really work fine here. And we will turn this out into our bowl. Give it a quick turn through the bowl just to coat the whole thing with a little bit of oil. Grab your plastic wrap, my nemesis. And we're going to let this rise until it's doubled in size. Typically, this takes about 30 minutes. Right now, while I'm filming this, it's winter, it's cold in my kitchen. It's probably gonna take a little bit longer. It helps if you can set it in a warm, draft-free place. My microwave gets nice and warm sometimes, so I'm gonna put it in there. All right, once your dough has risen, we're going to uncover it. And this did take longer than 30 minutes for me. It's quite cold in my kitchen. I'm going to just lightly flour a clean surface, turn out the pizza dough. All right, I'm going to lightly flatten this, and I'm just going to knead this a little bit. You can barely even call this kneading. I just want to fold it over itself a couple of times just to get it nice and smooth and cohesive. Make sure it's nicely floured. Lightly flour the dough. And we're going to roll this into a 15 by 9 inch rectangle. I'm really bad with rolling nice uniform pizza crusts, round ones, so just be prepared that I'm equally bad at rolling nice, neat rectangles. All right, not my best work, not my worst work. We have a rectangle. I'm going to lightly brush this with a little bit of olive oil Once that's nicely brushed, we're going to add our tomato sauce. Listing an amount of tomato sauce and cheese and pepperoni, if you're using that you need, is a little bit tricky because that's going to vary depending on your exact brand of sauce, how much sauce you like. But what you want is a nice thin layer of pizza sauce or marinara sauce. I usually only need like 1/4 cup of sauce. You don't want to do too much or it can kind of make the rolls soggy and make them fall apart. And I do have a homemade pizza sauce recipe that I use on my homemade pizza dough and my sourdough pizza dough. So if you want to make this completely from scratch, you can do that, or you can use store-bought. Now, when I am spreading this, I am going to leave about 1/4 inch perimeter all around the dough. That's going to help it come together nicely. Keep it from falling apart. See, there's not a ton of sauce, but there is a fair amount. Next is the cheese. We're going to be using mozzarella cheese. This is 6 ounces or 1.5 cups of shredded mozzarella. I did shred this cheese myself. Well, it was shredded in-house, which is my preference anytime we're working with cheese, because then you don't get those anti-caking agents and you get a really nice melt. And I like to evenly distribute this and then just kind of gently press it into the crust or the dough. And then if you want to add pepperonis, you can add them here as well. You can add big or minis. I just have minis on hand today, so that's what I'm going to be using. You could put other pizza toppings in here if you prefer. Like if you wanted to do olives, I would never, but if you wanted to, you could add them here as well. You don't want to add too much, but you can get away with some add-ins, mix-ins. All right, now we're going to roll this up. You want to roll it up tightly. That way it doesn't come apart when you're cooking it. And just go side to side. What a nice tight roll. Oh, a little bit messy right there. Nobody look at that. I'm just gonna pinch the edges together. Just pretend that one didn't happen. Okay, now sometimes if I'm impatient, I will just go ahead and start cutting this and baking it right away. But for best results, it's good to let this get a little bit cold. It makes slicing it a lot easier. So what I'll do is I'm going to just put it on my baking sheet, carefully transfer it, and I'm going to pop this in the fridge. While it's in the fridge, I'm going to preheat my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. This will sit for about 15 minutes. I don't cover it. If I were trying to keep it longer, I would cover it. But for 15 minutes, uncovered in the fridge while the oven preheats. And then in 15 minutes, I'll grab this out, we'll slice it, and we'll bake it. All right, we're back 15 minutes later. This is actually a little bit closer to 30 just because my children needed lunch in this time. So it can sit longer than 15 minutes. My oven is preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Use a serrated knife, and then you can kind of saw through, which helps you maintain the shape. And we're going to cut this into about 1-inch slices. I prefer to start in the middle of the log because then when I get down to the ends, I just cut off the excess because they're usually not super pretty anyway. So I always just start in the middle, but you can certainly start at one end. You can chop off the bottom here or you can leave it on, whichever you prefer. I'm going to cut it off just so it looks prettier, but that is a little bit more wasteful. And we're just going to arrange these on the baking sheet, cut side up. Now give them a little bit of breathing room while they're baking. It's okay if after they've baked, they're touching each other a little bit, but it helps them bake evenly if they have a little space. Before I put them in the oven, I like to brush them with just a little bit of salted butter, which just adds to the flavor, just sort of dabbing them a little bit. You could also use olive oil, which doesn't have the same flavor, but it does add a nice little touch. Don't use too much. They're not going to get super brown in the oven at all, but this can help encourage a little bit of browning. But they do stay pretty pale, which is normal and nothing to be concerned about. So there's no second rise or second proofing or anything like that necessary. As soon as you've brushed them, we can take them right over to our oven. That should be at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to bake them in the center rack. I find they usually need about 15 to 18 minutes in the oven. Obviously, they're still going to be hot when they first come out of the oven, but while they're still warm, something I like to do is take a little bit of Parmesan cheese and just grate that over the pizza rolls. Optional, but it does add a nice little touch. And a little bit of fresh basil, or today I'm just going to be using dried basil, adds a nice touch as well. Out of fresh basil for today. You could even do oregano, but I think it's pretty well documented that I'm not a big oregano fan. I have come a long way though. Now, if you pinch your seams a little bit better, you're going to get tighter rolls than I did. You can see this one is a little bit tighter than the rest of them. Either way, they're going to be delicious, and I think you're really going to love these. That's how easy it is to make them. If you try it at home, let me know what you think. I really do always love hearing from you. And if you're not using the #1 pizza dough on Google for your pizzas, your homemade pizzas, you might want to start doing that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Still kind of warm. That was a good pizza roll.